Peymon who?
Mottahedeh.
Peymon Mottahedeh. Who is he?
Never paid taxes in 30 years. Fought the U.S. tax court and won.
See, I believe our rights come from God, not from government. Hello to my truth and freedom-seeking friends. I am Peymon Mottahedeh, the president of Freedom Law School, which I started in 1996. In this presentation, I will show you that the original deep state is the IRS, going back to 1913. That's right. Many of you have seen how the FBI, the CIA, the DOJ, CDC, FDA, these are all a bunch of corrupted federal government agencies. Yes, but the original one that was corrupted and enslaved you and fed these crooked government agencies to become deep state is the IRS, and you can defund it legally and safely if you go to our website, freedomlawschool.org, and take the 7 steps to free yourself of IRS deception, IRS fear, robbery, and slavery. So let's get into the topic of the deep state IRS in 1913. But first, I must give you a little background in the U.S. Constitution and early taxation in America. I'm going to get into the topic as quickly as I can. You're going to find this very empowering to you, okay? So first, we're going to go to U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, okay? Here, the Constitution that the Founding Fathers wrote, okay, puts a limitation on the federal government's powers to tax you. They were freedom lovers. They did not want the newly created federal government, which was an agent of the states, become your slave master. No way. They wouldn't allow for that. So that's why they wrote this in the Constitution, that representatives and direct tax representatives and direct taxes on people shall be apportioned, which means divided up among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers. Okay? Now, how was that applied? I'll show you the example how they did this in just a minute. But first, I want to show you another part of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, which states, no capitation, which means head tax. Like decapitate to cut off someone's head, that's a head tax, capitation. Or direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration, which means numbering, counting, hereafter before directed to be taken. They have to count how many people live in each state and then divide up the tax amongst the states. Each state gets its share of direct taxes to, collect from each of its people, give it to the federal government, minus a 10% commission that the states kept for the work of collecting the tax for the federal government. So here it is. You're going to see now, this is acts of the federal government, okay? This is one of the first acts Congress did in July of 1798. Look, John Adams was president. Thomas Jefferson was vice president of the United States, okay? And here's what this Tax Act said. This tax, we did what? We did a direct tax of $2 million shall be and hereby is laid upon the United States and apportioned to the states respectively in the manner of the following. Okay? Notice the term apportioned, right? It's an apportionment tax of $2 million. And here you see the states listed. To the state of New Hampshire, $77,705. 36 cents, and 2 mils, that's 1/10 of a cent. To the state of Massachusetts, $260,435.31 and 2 mils. You see, all the original states, countries of this union are listed there, okay? A portion amongst them, how much each state must collect. And that was done in the early 1800s several times by Congress, correctly according to the U.S. Constitution, okay? Now, there was a short direct tax during the War of the States, the so-called Civil War, which, Lincoln did unconstitutionally among the states, but no one challenged it during the war because the South was broken away. It was a wartime. So eventually, in 1871, it got repealed, and that was just a short-term thing, lasted, less than 10 years. But other than that, here is a continuation of the whole income tax story, okay? The Congress tried to enact a law putting income tax in place, okay? And that law was overturned in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company, okay? And what happened in this case, this was a landmark case in 1895, 5-4 decision, and the Supreme Court struck down the income tax imposed by the Wilson-Horman Tariff Act for being an unapportioned direct tax. See? Unapportioned direct taxes are not allowed by the Constitution. Okay? This is a well-known thing. Everybody admits, even most ignorant lawyers and CPAs admit that. Okay? However, they thought they changed things. They didn't. But they elected the first deep state president crook, Wilson. Okay? Wilson was an agent of the international banksters, president of Princeton, and he had sexual relations with another man's wife, and they used that to blackmail him. That's right. He was blackmailed and controlled. He was the first really fully controlled president America had, and he passed the Federal Reserve Act that created a gigantic trust of big banks that own our money system. He also tried to get ratified the 17th Amendment, which took the states' power to directly appoint the senators to represent the state's interest by having it become a people's vote instead, which money could buy instead. Okay. By the way, 17th Amendment was not ratified. And the 16th Amendment, which was also not ratified, but pretended to give Congress new power of taxation to tax you, the American people, without a need for an apportionment of the tax among the states or enumeration. So let's get into this, okay? So here is the 16th Amendment. The language of this amendment, which was not ratified, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter because it's irrelevant anyways. As you shall see, he says that Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. So, it looks like you don't have to worry about apportionment. You don't have to worry about doing any census or enumeration, counting how many people live in each state to be dividing up the tax. But guess what? That was all a ruse, a deception on the American people by the deep state that the international banksters owned at the time, the politicians, and the crooked Wilson. So, here is the Supreme Court. Don't believe me, folks? In Stanton versus Baltic Mining Company. Okay, came out in 1916. After a case called Bushaber versus Union Pacific Railroad, they both talked about the federal income tax. The Stanton court clearly said this, okay? By the previous ruling, the Bushaber case, it was settled that the provisions of the 16th Amendment of the Constitution conferred no new power of taxation. Whoa, wow! Huh! Look at that. You know, if 16th Amendment did not give the power to tax the people of the 50 states directly, which beforehand it didn't have, that means that Congress cannot tax the people of the 50 states after the 16th Amendment either. So, how are they taxing the American people? Oh, a loophole and deception of the Wilson deep state does the job. What they did was this. They used the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and another section I will show you. Okay, here, the Congress gives the federal government the power to exercise exclusive legislation or lawmaking in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square, which eventually became the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., okay, as made by secession of particular states and acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States, okay? So, and have same authority over any land or territory that the federal government has. Why? Because the number one reason for the federal government existence was to coordinate the states as military defensive units against England, which might try to take the states back by force, which probably it did in 1812. There was a war in 1812 between England and America. So they said, you can do whatever you want in those lands to make sure these military places, are run efficiently and properly to protect the states, these new 13 countries in a union, from the King of England taking us back as their slaves. Furthermore, in the Constitution, they added this also in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, which says, Congress shall have power to dispose of, make all needful rules and regulations, any and all rules and regulations not necessary, respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. Any territory, land, or anything belonging to the federal government, they can have any kind of rules and regulations they want for it. Wow, that is big. Just any rules and regulations. So, how does that go into practice? Well, in the case of Down versus Bidwell, which came out in 1901, that was the case they used and this principle to tax the people of the 50 states. Now, it's going to get a little bit digressed, but I'll come back to the point. Hang in there with me, okay? In this case, the court said that the island of Puerto Rico, which was taken in 1895 by the Spanish-American War from Spain, along with Philippines and Guam and some other lands. This was taken as U.S. territories. These were not Anglo-Saxon white European people. They did not speak English. They didn't have our heritage of freedom and common law. Okay, had no jury trial, things like that. They could not be becoming states, just like the continental United States all could and did become states eventually, right? So they remained territories of the federal government, like war prize of the federal government. And so a tax was done between Puerto Rico and places outside of Puerto Rico, and the Supreme Court said this, that the island of Puerto Rico is not a part of the United States. What? It was part of the United States. Oh, but not within that provision of the Constitution, which declares that all duties, imposts, and excise taxes shall be uniform throughout the United States. So when it comes for taxing purposes, Puerto Rico is not part of the United States. What does that mean? Well, in Down versus Bidwell, the court had basically a convoluted decision of majority and a minority that was against them. Here's a good summary of Downs versus Bidwell that is given to us by Wikipedia. Okay, it's a good summary, actually. Okay, I don't like Wikipedia, but in this case, it's right on. Okay, this was a 1901 case in which the U.S. Supreme Court decided that whether U.S. territories were subject to the provisions and protections of the U.S. Constitution. Wow, and they are not. That's right. We'll go a little bit further. Here's what the court says. The decision basically narrowly held that the Constitution does not necessarily apply to territories. Instead, U.S. Congress has jurisdiction or legal power to create law within the territories, right? In certain circumstances, particularly those dealing with revenue taxes, which would not be allowed by the Constitution for the U.S. states. Oh, yeah. So in other words, you could tax the territories and all the limitations on taxing power of the federal government do not apply whatsoever to Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories in Washington, D.C., naval bases, military bases, because those are just lands. But the federal government can do whatever it wants to its and its people, because at that land, it's just, that's the way the Constitution gives the government the power to do what they want in there. Right? Okay. Let's continue. Now, I will read you the minority decision, okay? With Justin Harlan, okay? The minority decision gave a very scathing response to what the majority said, okay? And here's what it said. This is going to be something that's going to relate to us in America now. The idea prevails with some indeed as indeed it has expression in arguments at bar. That we have in this country substantially two national governments. Oh, two? One to be maintained under the Constitution, the Union States, with all its restrictions, and the other to be maintained by Congress, outside and independently of that instrument. Okay? That's Washington, D.C. and its territories like Puerto Rico. By exercising such powers as other nations of the earth are accustomed to. See? They recognize you're creating right now two different systems of laws. One for the Union States and one for D.C. and territories. Okay? Now, here is where it gets interesting more. They continue as saying that I take leave or I disagree to say that if the principles thus announced should ever receive the sanction of a majority of this court that it did, a radical and mischievous change in our system will result. Yep, and it has done exactly that. We will, in that event, pass from the era of constitutional liberty, guarded and protected by a written constitution, into an era of legislative absolutism, which means the legislature can write whatever laws it wants with no restriction. Okay? It will be an evil day for American liberty if the theory of a government outside the supreme law of the land finds lodgment in our constitutional jurisprudence. Yep. Because I tell you, folks, all the stuff they're doing, Medicare, Social Security, income taxes, Obamacare, all these things are written for D.C. and territories and its people, not the 50 states. Hold on, I'm going to get to that in just a minute. You're shocked to hear all this, but it's all true. So that's why you see here is the very first 1913 Act, Tariff Act of 1913, okay? And here in this law, they imposed an income tax, right? From on a net income arising or accruing from all sources, right? To every citizen of the United States and to every person residing in the United States, okay? And upon the entire net income from all property owned and of every business, trade, or profession carried on in the United States by the persons residing elsewhere. Yeah. And the word United States, we're going to come back to in just a minute. The tax was very low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. Look, 1% tax was paid by someone who made over $20,000 back then. That would be about $2 million in today's money, approximately. You'd pay only 1%. Let's put the camel's nose under the tent. Lay it on the whole camel. We'll get in and take over the whole tent. Look at this. The 6% tax, just 6%, was if you made over $500,000. In today's money, that would be someone making over $50 million would only pay 6%. So, clearly, very few people were covered by this tax. The average person was not touched by it. Nobody thought about it, but they just assumed that it applies to them. Okay? Because the 16th Amendment was ratified. Yeah, it says the tax is constitutional in the Boucher case. But remember, Stanton case said, Stanton versus Baltimore Mining Company said, did not give Congress any new taxing power. They could not tax you in the 50 states. So that's why you see this definitions of the United States, the key terms, in the 1913 law. Here it is. Let's go on to definition of the term United States and state. Look at that shocking definition. That the word state or United States, when used in this section, shall be construed to include any territory of the United States, Alaska, which was a territory at the time, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Philippine Islands. Yeah, Philippines was part of the U.S. territory at the time, when such construction or interpretation is necessary to carry out its provisions. Whoa! Look at that! The deep state knew. The deep state knew that they could not apply the income tax to the people of the 50 states. The international bankers want to tax directly on the people and not to have to go through the states to pay that for the federal government to pay interest on the loans they were going to make out of thin air by fraud to the federal government. That's why they did it. The international banksters. That's the start of fraud on the American people. But who reads law books? Lawyers, most law is state law. Murder, rape, stealing, divorce, whatever. Federal law is a very narrow area. There are very few people have any relation to federal laws. There are very few federal lawyers and federal judges. These were hidden in federal law books in plain sight. No one read it. No one that I know of put it out there. You've been deceived, people, but the tax was low. So, what did they do next? They needed another crook to the bidding of the international banksters. And that's Roosevelt. Before I get to Roosevelt, though, let me tell you about these definitions. In Gould versus Gould, the Supreme Court decided in 1979 a very clear thing about taxes. 9-0 tax case, here is what it said. These definitions I read to you are binding. That's all there is to tax in the federal income tax of 1913. D.C. and its territories. Supreme Court says in the interpretation or understanding of statutes, laws, levying or imposing taxes. In imposing laws that, understanding laws that impose taxes, it is the established rule not to extend the provision of tax laws by implication or implying beyond the clear import of the language used, or to enlarge their operations so as to embrace matters not specifically pointed out, something specifically not pointed out is not there. The 48 states back then were not in the definition of the United States or states. So they were not there. Okay? And if you have any doubts, the Supreme Court says that the tax laws are construed or interpreted most strongly against the government's power to tax and in favor of the citizen being taxed. There's a well-established rule. Here's the other court cases the court refers to. Because taxation is theft. Theft must be minimal by governments, must be very clear. Any doubt goes against the government's power to steal from you and make you a slave. Right? 9-0 tax case. So that's how you know that they knew what they were doing. They were using deception to make you slave, rob, and control you. And feed the deep state. They're going to, over years, build the FBI, the CIA, the DOJ, FDA, CDC, all of them. These federal agencies are going to be fed by making you a slave of the Washington, D.C. empire. Okay? Now we'll see how in the 1930s came this other crooked president, socialist Franklin Roosevelt. Okay? He gave the Federal Reserve much more powers, okay, and got us into World War II, okay? But before we get to that stuff, okay, in 1935, he introduced the Social Security tax, okay? Here it is income tax on employees, okay? Section 801, in addition to other taxes, there shall be levied, collected, and paid upon the income of every individual at tax equal to following percentages of wages, okay? With respect to employment during the calendar years 1937, 38, 39, the rate shall be 1%. This was the very first Social Security tax. And it was, again, low, but gradually lifted, okay? Look at it. They already planned after 1948 to make it 3%. Now, of course, it's much higher than that. There's a tax on employees. It also a tax on employers. Similar language, okay? In addition, he tax on employees, right? Employers. In addition to other taxes, every employer shall pay an excise tax with respect to having an individual and his employee equal to the following percentage of wages, okay? With respect to employment during the calendar year 1937, 8 and 9, the rate shall be 1%. And here we are. By the time we get to 1949, it will be 3%. Now, this was the first time they're going to dupe employers to become agents of the federal government to steal from their employees like you. Okay? Here's where it gets more interesting. Okay? When they did that, oh, by the way, when they did this thing, the only people that they had to tax in these laws, okay, was federal government employee. That's right. The only people they could tax was federal government employees. Okay? And I'll show that to you in a little bit. This temporary tax, the victory tax on individuals, there was a collection and withholding also explained here, where it says that there shall be withheld, collected, and paid upon all wages of every person to the extent that such wages are includable in gross income and tax equal to 5% of the excess of each payment of such wages over the withholding deduction and not allowable on this part. Okay? That's when started this tax collection withholding. And how about withholding agent? Who's the withholding agent? Your boss? You, the American people? Oh no. A very clear category of people, which is not over 99% of you. Look at this. Withholding agent, okay? The tax required to be withheld by the section 466 shall be collected by the person having the control of payment of such wages, but deducting such amount of such wages as when paid. Okay, but as used in this subsection, the term person includes, who got to withhold? People got to withhold includes officers and employees of the United States or of a state. Oh, by the way, remember, the state means DC and its territories at the time, not the 50 states. They use the state of the United States, but by definition, it does not include the 50 states, right? They use this repetitious to deceive you, make you think they mean state. When you read the code, the language, it doesn't mean state. It is DC and territories only at that time still. Okay? Territory or any political subdivision thereof, or of the District of Columbia, or agency or instrumentality of any one of the more of the foregoing. Yep. So basically, if you worked for the federal government as agency or officer, and if you employ somebody, that person you have to withhold from. It was a tax on federal government employees. But they didn't tell you about this. It was there in plain sight, the law, and you did not see it, and no one questioned this withholding tax in 1942, which led to eventually everybody getting used to being robbed by the employers. The employers now got used to stealing from you. Social Security, they were agents of the government, and income taxes. And that is the core power of the income tax, is employers have accepted, been duped and deceived, coerced. They become agents of the government to steal from wage earners. Let me tell you, you can stop stealing by your employer of your wages by going to our website, freedomlawschool.org. Yes, for free. And if you have any questions, call us. We'll guide you, help you at 813-444-4800. Now let's do the next chapter, the temporary income tax on individuals. Yep. Victory tax on individuals, okay? This was done in 1942. Yep. The war with Japan and Germany, Italy, okay? And back then, they said that there shall be levied and collected and paid for each taxable year, beginning after December 31 to 1942, a victory tax of 5%, right? Upon the victory tax and income of every individual. Okay, that's when they started deceiving people to allow 5% stealing from the wages of them. The men were at war, husbands, brothers, and sons, and the wives, mothers, and sisters were working to support their husbands. Of course, they didn't mind having a little bit of withholding to support their husbands, sons, and brothers in the war for them to be alive and come back, right, safely. So here we go. In that tax, it was a temporary tax, and they started withholding scam, and guess what? It was supposed to end when the war ended, but they kept the withholding 5% going after 1945, when the war had ended. By that time, over 30 years had passed since 1913. Most everybody believed that, hey, I'm a U.S. citizen, I must have withholding from my paycheck, and I must pay income tax. So, and people don't object. Only one lady, Vivian Kellum, made some objections about the income tax, okay, which went nowhere. So then what happened by 1954, okay, Internal Revenue Code of 1954, they cemented the Internal Revenue Code as a real thing that everybody has to pay. Then it became a 1986 law. Here's today's modern day Internal Revenue Code, the Bible of the IRS. Yep. This is really the 1954 code, became 1986 code, and they do modifications every so often there in the modern day system. And they really started enforcing the income tax as if everybody is in the 50 states paying income taxes since the 1950s. Okay. Now, what they did, of course, over the decades, the rate of income tax, which was very low in the beginning in 1913 and 2015, it went up fast after war, during and after World War I. Look at that. Okay, up to 73% tax rate. Okay, and even after World War II, it kept going on. During World War II, it was up to 94%, the income tax rate. Okay? And look at it. Even after World War II, it was up to 91% federal income tax rate. So now it's come down to top rate of 37%. Yeah. But guess what? It's not like it was back in 1913. That's how they got the scam going. Okay? Now you have here, today, you can look up the law for yourself at this website, uscode.house.gov. This website is a website for the United States Code, which is a consolidation and codification by subject matter of the general and permanent laws of the United States. And it is prepared by the Office of the Law Revision Council of the United States House of Representatives, the official source of the law. So we look at the law today, okay, in Title 26, the Internal Revenue Code, Chapter 79, definitions. Section 7701 says, when used in this title, Title 26, look at the term United States and State. Oh, wow. Look at that. It only includes the District of Columbia, in definition of state, and United States. D.C. is not a state, but they're listed there because they can tax D.C. The territories, eventually they took them out of being taxed as income taxes, and all you have is D.C. That's why only the D.C. individuals got to file income tax, not the people of the 50 states. The scam of the deep state goes back over 100 years. Now, you want to further educate yourself about all this to be free of the IRS, okay? And to do that, you need to go to our website, freedomlawschool.org. Yes, this is a place where you will be able to restore freedom, take 7 steps to regain your power and freedom, and never again voluntarily pay the Washington, D.C. swamp legally and safely, and with a guarantee if that is what you want. You click on the 7 steps right there and go down. The step 1 is follow the law. You'll see in detail for yourself that based on the official legal websites of the U.S. government, no law requires 99% of Americans to file and pay income taxes. Yeah. These 10-minute videos a starter. Then there's 4 other short videos between 5 to 10 minutes. And then these 5 videos have these other 5 videos in more complete detail, about half hour each, before we go to the next steps. So my brothers and sisters, you just saw the truth exposed. The deep state goes back over 100 years. Donald Trump is taking down the corrupt FBI, DOJ, hopefully CIA, CDC, the FDA, all these agencies, right? But guess what? We, you and I, need to help Donald Trump expose the master deep state, the IRS, and the later big brother Federal Reserve. Because that's what funds them. Without the IRS deceiving you to give them money with the help of the accountant, CPAs, and tax attorneys who are ignorant of the law, who you pay to enslave you and put the rope around your neck with that 1040 form and give it to the IRS. They could not do all the evil that they've been doing. So, on the drive to and from work, always put our videos up, listen to them as you drive to and from work, at lunch and dinner, put your smartphone up again, and verify this time, see it, and tell everybody about us. You don't have to be a slave no more. You are free if you choose freedom. And to choose freedom, you must choose to educate yourself as a free man or woman. So grasp your power, folks. Free yourself, and then love everyone close to you. Your spouse, children, siblings, parents, your friends, co-workers, everyone you know. Call us. We'll mail you the brochures, Restore Freedom, for free to pass out to everybody you know. Educate them about all this. And text them. Put it on your social media, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble. Put our videos up there. and we'll pay you if you tell other people about us when they join our Restore Free plan, which is an optional. But all of this you can do for free on your own if you want. And brothers and sisters, I want to give you all my love and wish everyone freedom and peace, joy, and prosperity for you and your family.